Hi, I'm Greg Hull, a member of the firm of SEK CPAs and the leader of the firm's not-for-profit section. I've been with SEK for 32 years and spent the majority of the time providing accounting, auditing, and tax assistance to not-for-profit and affordable housing entities. I wish to thank you for joining the video today as I answer questions on how to start up a not-for-profit organization. Today, I'm joined by Lucy Zander. She's the Executive Director of the United Way of Carlisle and Cumberland Counties, and she will serve as the moderator for this recording. So let's get started. Lucy, do you want to ask me some questions about setting up a not-for-profit entity?
Absolutely. I have 20 questions. Greg, I have an idea for an organization to help disadvantaged individuals in our community. How do I go about setting up an organization?
Well, the first thing you would need to do, I'd recommend, is talk with an attorney. And they can guide you through the organization structure. That would be best. The new entity setup could be an unincorporated organization or association, which I have run into in the past. You could have a limited liability company, and there's guides out there now to do that, or you could have a corporation. I would recommend that the organization be set up as a corporation. An attorney can draft the articles of incorporation for the not-for-profit entity, and they can also assist with the development of a set of bylaws as well.
So why would you recommend an organization be set up as a corporation?
One, it does provide some limited personal liability protection for the members, particularly the board of directors that might be serving there. It provides a formal structure. Also, if an entity starts out as something other than a corporation, later decides to incorporate, you got to go through the application process again. And that includes obtaining a new employee identification number, which means you're going back to the bank and setting up accounts and going through that process again to update that information.
So is there anything I need to do beyond obtaining the articles of incorporation to become a nonprofit entity?
Well, if you obtain the articles of incorporation, that's really just the beginning of becoming a not-for-profit. And I like to think of not-for-profits really as tax-exempt entities is really what they are. And so what you're beginning is the process of applying for being tax exempt. The other connotation when people say not-for-profits, a question I get frequently is that we can't make money because we're not-for-profit. What is the limitation on making money? And there really is no limitation. You have to have the financial resources and funds to continue your mission. So you should be budgeting to make money at it or build up a reserve or surplus. When hard times come, you have that money there to fall back on and continue to operate. Now, once you do, come back to the question, once you do have the articles of incorporation, then you got to determine what type of entity or tax exempt recognition you would fall under. If you want to be a public charity, there's a 1023 recognition of an application under Section 501c3 for charity, or Form 1024 application for exemption under 501a or Section 521 of the Internal Revenue Code for other types of tax-exempt entities that you might qualify for.
So there can be tax-exempt entities other than public charities. So can you give me some examples of what these would be?
Yes, there are some common types of other tax-exempt entities I think people see out there. One would be chambers of commerces or other business leagues that are exempt under Section 501(6). Also 501c7 organizations. Country clubs are typically exempt under those, as well as other social and recreation clubs as well. There are many other types of exemptions that you could obtain if you're not considered a charity, but let's focus on setting up a charity here for this video.
So one of the recognized benefits of being a public charity is the ability to accept tax-deductible contributions. What other benefits, if any, exist?
One of the benefits would be the exemption from federal unemployment tax. And also there's options of how you pay your state unemployment compensation. You can either go under the pay-as-you-go method, which all businesses follow, or you could do the reimbursement method where you reimburse the state when somebody applies for that. There's some hoops you have to jump through for that, but you do have an option there. One thing I want to clear up at this point is there is a current misconception that I run into that if you're federal tax exempt, that you're automatically exempt from state sales and use tax. State sales and use taxes, as it applies, is run by the state. They have their own application that you have to complete and submit in order to be exempt from tax. I have some because they have so little purchases that qualify, they have not applied for it because in their belief, it's more time involved than money they'll save. And there's other ones, obviously large organizations, that behooves them to do that because they can save thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars of sales tax on the purchases that are doing the year. But it is a separate application, and getting federal tax exemption does not provide you state sales tax exemption.
So in order to be a public charity or a 501c3 entity, we would need to complete Form 1023. So what all is involved in that process?
Well, as I mentioned before, the first step is have an attorney who's familiar with setting up tax-exempt entities, draft the articles of incorporation and bylaws. For a 501c3 particularly, there's specific language the IRS requires to be in those documents. It basically around the transfer and disposal of assets and who they go to. The other item would be just making sure wording in there saying that you will operate within specific requirements of Section 501c3. At this time, if you've not already obtained your tax exempt number, it's a good time to do that. If you've not already done it, go ahead and get your employer identification number. But I do want to caution, most attorneys will do that as part of getting the articles of incorporation and the bylaws. They'll just go ahead and get you set up in that manner to begin with. Also, one thing to keep in mind, there was a recent change 2 years ago where if you're completing the Form 1023, it now has to be completed online using the paid.gov website. And you will need to register for an account, and then you'll select the Form 1023 to be prepared. Now, there are two types of 1023s. There's the Form 1023 Easy, which as the name implies is very easy to complete. However, it is restricted for very simple, non-complex organizations and narrowly focused. Example would be an entity that perhaps put on the parade or a Christmas pageant for children. They raise very little money. They have no intention of growing that entity. It's pretty straightforward. So the revenue is minimal. So they would qualify for the easy. There is a checklist that the IRS requires people to go through that specifically says, let me put it this way, if you answer yes, you can't use the 1023, and they'll give specific examples. The 1023 easy, you have to use the long form.
So if our organization needed to complete the more complex form, what all is involved in preparing that?
It requires significantly more time. It asks more questions around related party type transactions, leases, assets that the organization might have. One of the common things I want to point out, most people that come to me have not thought about is their finances for the current and next 2 years. There is a section that requires a current year budget and the next 2 years' budgets be prepared and submitted with the form. So people need to think about their finances for that in the next 2 years. They're not looking for a projection or a forecast. Very simple, but they want to know people will put some thought into that process.
Mm-hmm. So once the Form 1023 is filed, is the entity now tax exempt?
No, the entity is not tax exempt at this time. Keep in mind that the 1023 is an application for exemption. As the name implies, you're applying. It does not guarantee that you will be given tax exempt status. If you are approved by that, the IRS will issue a letter saying they acknowledge you as being tax exempt. And that letter is very important to keep and maintain for your existence, because very sophisticated donors and grantors will frequently ask for a copy of that letter. I would also like to point out that the IRS is now putting them online, so you can go into the IRS website and do a search for an entity and find out if the letter's out there, and you actually have a copy of the letter out there as well, and the 1023 in some cases.
So how long does approval typically take?
In the past, prior to the pandemic, the approval was approximately 180 days, 6 months. Now, I've had people go almost a year before getting acknowledgement due to the backup. And as you've probably seen in articles, how long it's taken to respond to general public out there on issues, and this is no exceptions.
So while the application for exemption is pending, can we solicit donations?
Technically, you can solicit donations. However, if it turned out the IRS would not approve you, you'd have to go back to the donors and let them know that the donations were not tax deductible for the entity. I will say most large donors or sophisticated grantors would not make a contribution until they know you have that approval in hand.
So once I receive the official notice of approval, is there anything I need to know or do going forward?
Yes, once you get the notice, and even before you get the notice, there's an annual filing requirement. So if you've applied for or you've got the notice, you need to treat yourself as though you're a not-for-profit or tax-exempt entity, and you would have to file certain returns. The easiest form is the Form 990N, which is an online registration with the IRS. The firm simply asks who the contact person is and requires the person to attest that annual gross receipts are normally less than or equal to $50,000. It's very simple. However, if you do not do this within a 3-year period, you will lose your tax-exempt status. It will be revoked, and you have to go through the approval process all again. The next form that you would have an option of completing is the 990EZ, and that's filed if your gross receipts are over $50,000 and less than $200,000, and the total assets are under $500,000. The full Form 990 is required if gross receipts are over $200,000 or total assets are equal to or greater than $500,000. However, if you qualify for an N, you can file an EZ or the long form. And if you qualify for an EZ, you can also file the long form as well. It's really your option, but one of those three you would need to file.
So why would an organization want to file a more complex form if it's not required by the IRS?
This is frequently driven by more sophisticated donors. I have encountered instances in my career in which donors requested information on the long form, which is not provided on the N or the EZ. And so it really depends in some cases what the organization information they want be reported. One of the areas I have run into this before is the Pennsylvania State Employees Combined Appeal, when organizations solicit to request for donations.
So when are these funds due to the IRS?
Well, the forms here are due the 15th day of the 5th month following the end of the organization's fiscal year. And it's important to know non-for-profits can have any fiscal year end, so there's no set filing date like individuals have of April 15th. So if you are a December 31st 990 filer, it would be due on May 15th. If you're a June 30 990 filer, it would be due November 15th. If you're a November 30 year-end not-for-profit, we do April 15th. But it's the 15th day of the 5th month following the end of your fiscal year.
It's a tongue twister. After filing Form 990 with the IRS, are there any other forms that we would need to file?
Yes. If your organization has employees, obviously you have your quarterly payroll tax returns and your W-3s and W-2s for employees. There's also 1099 filing requirements if you engage individuals or organizations and you pay $600 or more for services or rent, and that would be unincorporated organizations that you engage for their services. The 1099 filing is probably the most overlooked filing which we run into. It's very easy to miss. The IRS does not send reminders. They expect you to understand the rule that if you make this payment, that you're required to file a form to the IRS reporting that. The only way people usually find out they have that requirement is if they get audited, because that is a standard audit question. Please provide a copy of your 1099s that you filed. In most cases, if you filed it and provided a listing of who it was, they don't even go any further. But there's so much people don't know or don't choose to follow that or file those forms. There are also solicitation of filings, Solicitation of Funds Act, which require filings with different states that may impact the organization as well.
Can you elaborate on the state filing requirement?
Yes, Pennsylvania, as an example, has an Act 202 from 1990. It's known as the Solicitation of Funds for Charitable Purposes Act. And certain public charities, if they solicit over $25,000, need to register. So there are some exemptions from that. As I mentioned, most states have these acts. If you're soliciting large contributions to other states, you really got to be aware of it because you could run afoul of their Solicitation of Funds Act as well.
So you mentioned solicitation. So what is considered solicitation?
Simply any request for a donation for a charitable purpose. It can be either direct, indirect, oral, written, As a result, any money you ask for would be considered a solicitation. I'd also like to point out it also includes fundraising activities. So if you have golf outings, the gross receipts, not the net from that, would go into determining that $25,000 threshold.
So early in our conversation, you mentioned certain public charities are exempt. So what types of public charities would be exempt?
Some of the more common ones would be churches, hospitals, hospital foundations. Certain organizations are exempt as long as they don't use paid solicitors, like volunteer fire companies. If they use all volunteers, they would be exempt. If they use a paid professional to help, then they lose that exemption and they would be subject to it. I'd really recommend organizations look at the act in the state, and it could be Pennsylvania or another state, to see who is exempt, because they may very well be exempt.
So is there a fee or other requirements required by the Solicitation of Funds Act?
There is a fee. There's a fee of $15 for a voluntary registration. So if you're under the $25,000, but you want to register anyhow, you can. And it goes up to $250 if your gross receipts are over $500,000. Now, one of the other things that gets people in this that they're not aware of is a requirement for a, let's say, certain quality or reliability of financial statement provided to the state. If the receipts from fundraising, gross receipts, I want to point that out, not net, are less than $100,000, then an internally prepared statement can be submitted. If the gross receipts are $100,000 to less than $250,000, they do require a compiled statement by an accountant or CPA. If the gross receipts are $250,000 to $750,000, a reviewed financial statement prepared by a CPA is required. And if they're over $750,000 of gross receipts, then an audited statement prepared by a CPA is required to be submitted as well. Well, I hope everyone finds this video informative and helpful. If you need further consultations or questions, please contact me or any one of our SEK offices. We have a team of skilled individuals that can help you and answer your questions. I'd also like to thank Lucy Zander, the Executive Director of the Carlisle and Cumberland County United Way. I had the privilege of serving on the board and being board chair and co-campaign chair several years ago for the organization. So, Lucy, would you like to give an advertisement for United Way?
Sure. Thanks so much, Greg. United Way fights for the health, education, and financial stability of every person in our community. And our United Way is able to do that by providing critical funding for 35 different programs in the Carlisle area and surrounding communities throughout Cumberland County. Additionally, we provide enriching activities for children from birth to age 5 through our Success by 6 initiative. And I'm just so pleased to be here this morning because SEK has supported our United Way, we believe, since the inception of SEK in our area and back in 1990. So we've enjoyed a really strong relationship with SEK. Many of their accountants have actually served as campaign co-chairs for our United Way. So we're happy to support them and offer this video to the community.
Thank you, Lucy. And thanks to everyone for tuning in and watching the video today.